Every person who is building toward something right now is doing one specific thing they were taught to do. They are setting goals, measurable goals, written goals, goals with deadlines and milestones and accountability structures. They have been told this is the foundation, the non-negotiable starting point, the thing every successful person swears by. And most of them are quietly falling behind anyway. Not because they are lazy, not because the goals are wrong, but because something no one told them is working against them at the exact moment they think the plan is working for them. Here is what is strange. The research on this is not new. It has been sitting in plain sight for decades. But there is an entire industry built on teaching you to set better goals, smarter goals, bigger goals. That industry has no financial interest in telling you what the most effective builders of real wealth actually do instead. What they do instead is not what you have heard before. It does not sound like discipline. It does not sound like hustle. It sounds at first like giving up. One man figured this out on a Tuesday afternoon in 2009. He was sitting in his car in a parking garage in Phoenix, staring at a goal chart he had spent a weekend building. By every visible measure, he was succeeding. By one invisible measure that actually mattered, he was trapped. What he did next doubled what he was worth, not over a decade, over 3 years. By the time this ends, you will not look at a goal the same way again. Not because someone convinced you to stop caring about results, but because you will finally see what goals cost you. Every single day you keep treating them as the answer. Chapter 1. Your goals are the problem, not the solution. There is a moment that has repeated itself across every generation of people who have ever reached for more than they were given. In every age, across every culture, in every language spoken by people who dared to want something bigger than their current circumstances, there has been a ritual, a writing down, a declaration, a list of things they intended to become and possess and achieve by a specific date. The ritual feels sacred. It feels like seriousness, like the moment you graduate from dreaming to doing. And then something strange happens, something that has also repeated itself across every one of those generations, in every one of those cultures, in the life of nearly every person who ever sat down with a clean page and a hopeful pen. The wanting gets harder, not easier. The gap between where they are and where they want to be becomes the loudest sound in every room they enter. You know that sound. You are hearing it right now. What you are about to encounter is not another system for setting better goals. It is the reason the ritual itself may be the thing holding you back. Here is where most books on wealth and success would stop. They would reframe the struggle, clean up the language, and send you back to the notebook with a new set of instructions. This is not that. Consider what a man named Raymond did on a Tuesday morning in early November. He was not famous. He was 41 years old, owned a mid-sized logistics company in a mid-sized city, and had spent the previous 11 years writing goals. Specific ones, measurable ones. Every January, a fresh leather journal. Revenue targets, net worth milestones, acquisition timelines, personal benchmarks for fitness and relationships and travel. He had filled 6 of those journals completely. He had achieved roughly a third of what he had written down. By every external measure, he was successful. By his own internal measure, he was losing. That Tuesday morning, Raymond sat at his kitchen table before anyone else in the house was awake. He opened journal number 7. He looked at what he had written in January. He looked at what he had achieved by November. For the first time in 11 years, he did not feel motivated by the gap. He felt punished by it. He walked the journal to the fireplace and burned it. Not in frustration, not in defeat. He stood there and watched it go, calm, almost curious, the way a person watches a fire when they are no longer cold. What happened to Raymond's business in the following 24 months is what this entire book is built around. His net worth did not plateau after he abandoned the ritual. It did not drift sideways while he rediscovered his footing. It doubled. The reason it doubled is the same reason you have likely never heard it described the way you are about to hear it described now. But to understand what Raymond discovered, you first have to understand exactly what his gold journal was doing to him. Not in theory, in practice, in the body, in the specific mechanics of how a written target changes the way a human mind processes every ordinary moment of every ordinary day. Think about the last goal you set seriously. Not a casual intention, but a real one with a number attached, or a date, or a specific condition for success. Maybe it was a savings target. Maybe it was a salary you wanted to reach. Maybe it was a debt you planned to eliminate by a certain month. Hold that goal in your mind for a moment. Now notice what happens in the space between where you are and that target. There is a measurement happening constantly. A quiet calculation that runs in the background of nearly every financial decision, every work conversation, every moment you open a banking app or scan a receipt. Are you there yet? The answer almost always is no. Not yet, still behind, still short. That is the scoreboard. And here is what no goal-setting seminar will ever tell you directly. The scoreboard is not a motivator. It is a tax. Every time you check it and find yourself behind, which is most of the time because that is how timelines work, you absorb a small psychological penalty. A quiet signal that says insufficient, not there yet, falling short. Multiply that signal across hundreds of moments in a week, and you begin to understand what goal setting actually produces in most people. Not drive, dread. Here is the thing that makes this so difficult to see. The feeling of dread wears the costume of ambition. You tell yourself you are motivated because you care, because you want it badly enough, because you feel the urgency. And some of that is real. But underneath the urgency, there is often a low-grade anxiety that has nothing to do with energy and everything to do with the permanent condition that goals create. The condition of not being there yet. Goals, by design, make the present moment a problem. The present moment is always the wrong moment when you have a goal, because the present moment is where you currently are and the goal is somewhere else. The goal is future tense. The entire structure of goal setting trains you to experience your current reality as a deficit. You are always, by definition, behind. You are always not there yet. The scoreboard always shows you losing. Go back to the shape of your life 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not the version of yourself you imagined you would be. The actual version. What you owned, what you earned, what you knew, who you spent time with, how capable you felt in a room full of people who seemed to know more than you. Think about how that person would see what you have built since then. What you understand now that you did not understand then. The ways you have quietly become someone different. The person you were 3 years ago would likely see progress where you currently see a gap. That is not motivation. That is evidence of something important. The scoreboard is pointing at the wrong moment. Now here is the question this chapter opened and has not yet answered. If Raymond burned the journal and the business doubled, what exactly replaced the goals? What was he doing instead of tracking targets? Because the obvious fear, the one that will surface if you are honest, is that without goals, without a number and a date and a measurement system, there is nothing left but drift. That without the scoreboard, you simply stop playing. Raymond did not stop playing. He started playing differently. He shifted from the architecture of outcomes to what you might call the work of the gardener. An architect plans the final structure before the first stone is placed. Every wall, every measurement, every room is determined in advance. When reality deviates from the plan, the architect calls it a problem. The gardener plants with intention, but understands that the soil, the season, and the conditions of each particular day determine the shape of the thing that grows. The gardener does not call a crooked branch a failure. The gardener adjusts and continues, present in each action, not measuring the flower against a blueprint. Raymond began treating his company like a garden. He focused on the daily conditions, the systems, the habits of the team, the quality of each decision as it appeared, not as it compared to a projected outcome. He stopped asking whether he was on track. He started asking whether today's work was good work, whether the current decision was a sound one, whether the person in front of him was being served well. Presence compounds. That is the principle that burned in the fireplace with journal number 7. Not that ambition is dangerous, not that wanting more is somehow wrong, but that the specific mechanism of goal setting, the constant measurement against a future state you have not yet reached, creates a chronic present tense deficit that quietly degrades every decision you make today. Decisions made from a feeling of falling short carry the distortion of that feeling. They tend toward urgency over clarity, toward the metric over the moment, toward the scoreboard over the game. Before long, we will reach an idea about motivation that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it starts changing what you do in the very first hour of your working day. But for now, hold this. The billionaire who quit goals did not become passive. He became precise. He stopped performing for a scoreboard that lived in a future he could not yet touch, and he put everything he had into the quality of the present game. The net worth doubled not because he stopped caring about money. It doubled because he stopped letting the absence of money, the not there yet, run the show. You have been taught to keep your eyes on where you want to go. What if the thing you have been missing requires your eyes to be somewhere else entirely? Chapter 2. The goal-setting industry needs you to stay wanting. Everyone who has ever set a goal believes they are doing the right thing. They believe the act of writing down a target, breaking it into steps, and chasing it with discipline is the path to a better life. Almost every success book you have ever read told you this. Almost every motivational speaker you have ever heard confirmed it. And almost every person you respect does some version of it. So you believe it. Of course you do. But that belief is wrong, not slightly off, not a matter of degree. Wrong in the way a compass can be wrong, pointing you north when every valuable thing is south of where you are standing. Here is the contradiction. Goal setting, as most people practice, it is not a wealth-building tool. It is a product. Designed and sold by an industry that only profits when you keep striving and never quite arrive. This chapter will show you exactly how that machine works. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. Here is where we left off. You have been taught to keep your eyes on where you want to go. What if the thing you have been missing requires your eyes to be somewhere else entirely? That question was not decorative. It is the hinge this entire chapter swings on. Let me introduce you to James. James is 31 years old. By almost any external measure, he is doing well. He earns $90,000 a year in software sales. He has read 44 books on productivity, goal setting, and financial growth. He owns a worn copy of a popular goal-setting planner, the kind that costs $60 and has 5 pages of worksheets before you write a single goal. He wakes at 5:30 in the morning because he read that high performers do. He has a vision board. He has a 10-year plan. He has quarterly reviews of his own life, sitting at his kitchen table on Sunday evenings to score himself against targets he set 3 months earlier. And James feels like a failure. Not occasionally, consistently. The specific quality of his failure shifts, sometimes money, sometimes his relationship, sometimes a promotion he wanted. But the feeling itself never leaves. It sits just under his daily routine like a low hum he cannot locate. He hits a goal and feels good for maybe a week. Then the planner asks what he wants next. So he writes something bigger, something harder, and the gap reopens wider than before. James is not unusual. James is the model customer. Remember the shape of your life 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Think about the goals you had then, the specific number you wanted to hit, the version of your life you were moving toward. Now ask yourself honestly, when you reached any of those targets, how long did you feel satisfied? A week? A month? Or did you reach the target and immediately feel pressure to set a new one, as if satisfaction was a room you could never actually enter, only see through a window? That is the open question this chapter will answer. Hold it. The goal-setting industry is not a fringe market. It is a documented, multi-billion-dollar ecosystem. Planners, journals, coaching programs, online courses, annual summits, and a publishing pipeline releasing hundreds of new titles every year, all built around the same central mechanism. That mechanism is the gap, the measurable distance between where you are and where you want to be. Without the gap, there is no product to sell. Without the gap, you do not need a planner, a coach, or a weekend retreat. The industry does not profit from your arrival. It profits from your perpetual departure. This is not a conspiracy. Nobody in a conference room agreed to keep you wanting. It is simpler and more structural than that. The business model itself requires your dissatisfaction. A goal-setting company that produced genuinely satisfied customers would go out of business within 2 years. So the tools are designed, sometimes consciously, often not, to refresh the gap as soon as you close it. Set bigger goals. Dream further. Never settle. These phrases sound like encouragement. They are also the mechanism by which the industry ensures its own survival. Here is the number that matters. Research on goal achievement consistently shows that reaching a goal produces a short, measurable spike in well-being. The average duration of that spike is between 1 and 3 weeks. After that, baseline returns. You feel approximately as satisfied or dissatisfied as you did before you achieved the thing. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. Marketers call it the repeat customer. James knows this treadmill well. He just does not have a name for it. One winter, James set a goal to earn $110,000 by the end of the following year. He made a plan. He broke it into monthly targets. He tracked every number in a color-coded spreadsheet. By November, he was on pace. By December, he had crossed the line. $112,000 in annual income. He went out for dinner to celebrate. He felt something real for about 4 days. Then the planner asked what comes next. He wrote $140,000. The gap reopened. wider, heavier, and James felt again like a man who had not yet arrived. Here is what nobody told James: the scoreboard was never the game. He had been so focused on the number at the top of his planner that he had stopped paying attention to what he was actually doing each day, how he was spending his attention, what relationships he was building, what skills were quietly compounding in the background. He was watching the scoreboard so hard he forgot to play. This is not just a motivational metaphor. There is a practical cost to scoreboard watching. When you run your life around measurable outcomes, you begin to avoid actions whose payoff is not immediately visible. You stop planting slow seeds. You stop doing the quiet, untrackable work that builds something real over time. The planner does not have a column for it. The industry does not sell a tool for it, and you cannot show it to anyone at a quarterly review. The gardener does not control the harvest. That is the truth no goal-setting program will ever put on its cover, because it would destroy the sale. A gardener works the soil, plants at the right time, removes what drains the ground, and then waits with skill, not with an outcome deadline. The harvest depends on conditions the gardener did not create and cannot fully predict. But the gardener's daily attention to what is actually happening in the soil right now is the only variable that consistently produces more over time. Down the line in this book, we will reach an idea about measuring progress that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it starts changing every decision you make about where to put your daily attention. For now, stay here. The billionaire at the center of this book built more wealth in 7 years without formal goals than in the previous 12 years with them. He did not stumble into his results by accident. He had a system, a quiet, almost counterintuitive set of daily behaviors that had nothing to do with the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be. He stopped looking at where he wanted to be. He looked instead at what he was becoming, at the quality of his daily decisions, at the health of the relationships and practices that money flows through. He stopped consulting the scoreboard every morning. He started playing the game better. That shift did not cost him anything. It gave him back the one resource that goal chasing had quietly stolen: his attention. Your attention is not a soft thing. It is your most liquid asset. Every hour you spend in an anxious crouch toward a future number is an hour you are not spending on the conditions that actually produce results. The goal-setting industry sold you a way to spend that attention. It felt productive. It looked productive. But productivity that produces the feeling of motion without actual forward movement is one of the most expensive things you can buy. Now close the loop. Remember the question you were asked to hold. Why does achieving goals feel so temporary? Because goals are products, not destinations. The feeling is designed to expire. The gap is the business model. And the moment you understand that, you stop being a customer and start being something else entirely. James eventually found his way to something different. Not through another planner. Not through a coach who asked him to dream bigger. He found it through a single question someone asked him late on a Tuesday afternoon. The question was not about where he wanted to go. It was about what kind of person he was becoming while he was going there. That question did more in 30 seconds than 44 books had done in 5 years. You already know what kind of person you have been becoming. The question the next chapter will answer is whether that becoming has been happening by design or simply by default. Chapter 3. What the billionaire did instead of setting goals. Planning your success in detail is one of the most effective ways to prevent it. That sounds like the kind of thing someone says to excuse laziness, permission to drift. It is not. It is an observation about what happens when the plan becomes more real to a person than the work. The plan feels like progress. The goal feels like something already half achieved. And somewhere in that feeling, the actual doing quietly loses its urgency. You have been here before. You have written down what you want, circled a date on a calendar, told yourself this time was different. Then watched the calendar become irrelevant before the ink was dry. That is not a character flaw. That is what happens when the wrong operating system is running underneath the right intentions. This chapter is about the other operating system. The one that does not ask what you want. The one that asks something far more unsettling and far more useful, by design or by default. Those were the words the last chapter left you with, and they are not rhetorical. Every single thing you have built financially in your life so far, every dollar saved or spent, every opportunity taken or declined, every financial identity you carry into a room, all of it was assembled by a version of you who was becoming something. The question is whether that becoming had an architect or just a current. Here is where the story of Marcus begins. Marcus Hale was not famous. He was not born into money. At 31, he ran a mid-sized commercial cleaning company in a smaller city in the Midwest, employed 16 people, and cleared about $200,000 in personal income annually. By most measures, he was doing well. By his own, he was standing still. He had goals, good ones, written down, dated, specific in the way every productivity book told him they should be. Expand into 2 new cities by year 3. Hit $500,000 in personal income by 40. Build a team of 40 employees. He reviewed those goals every Sunday morning with coffee he did not enjoy, a ritual that had slowly begun to feel like a punishment. The goals were not growing. He was reviewing them the way you check your bank balance when you already know it has not changed, with the faint hope that something will be different, and the heavy certainty that it will not. One evening, a woman named Carol, a retired operations director he had hired as a part-time advisor, asked him a question he had not been asked before. She did not ask what he wanted his company to look like in 5 years. She asked, what kind of operator does a company like this require at its center? Marcus started to answer with his goals. She stopped him. She said the goals describe an outcome. She wanted to know about the person. What does that person read? Who do they spend time with? What do they tolerate and what do they refuse? How do they make decisions when no one is watching? He did not have an answer, not a real one. What Carol handed him that evening was a single handwritten question on a piece of paper. It said, "Who does this work require you to become?" Marcus kept that piece of paper, not framed, not photographed, folded in his wallet, worn soft at the creases, pulled out and read maybe once a week for the next 2 years while everything around him changed. Look back at the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not abstractly, actually put yourself back there. The apartment or house you were in. The account balance you were staring at. The version of yourself making decisions with whatever information and whatever self-image was available at the time. Now consider this. What changed between then and now was not just your circumstances. What changed was who you understood yourself to be. The circumstances followed that change. They always do. Almost no one talks about it in those terms because it is harder to sell than a 5-step plan. This is the open question worth sitting with. If identity drives behavior and behavior drives outcomes, then why does almost every financial advice system start at the outcome end of that chain? The answer is that outcome-first advice is easy to package and easy to sell. Name the number, write the date, execute the steps. It maps to the way people want to feel in the room where advice is being given, in control, capable, clear. The SMART goal framework, the vision board, the quarterly review, all of it points forward at a target. None of it points inward at the person holding the bow. Marcus spent 6 months after that conversation doing something unusual. He stopped reviewing his goals. He started asking a different question each morning. What would the operator of a thriving, regionally dominant company do today? Not someday. Today. This Tuesday. Right now at 8 in the morning with 2 problems sitting on his desk, what would that person do first? The goals had told him where he wanted to go. The identity question told him how to move. The difference is not subtle once you feel it. A goal is an address. An identity is a compass. You can lose the address if you take a wrong turn. The compass works regardless of where you currently stand. Within 18 months, Marcus had opened in a second city without a formal expansion plan. The expansion was a consequence, a natural extension of the decisions a particular kind of operator keeps making. His income crossed $400,000 in his 3rd year of operating from the identity question, not from the goal. He did not hit his goals. He outgrew them before they were due. This is the framework that replaces goal setting. It has 3 parts. None of them require you to imagine your future self standing on a metaphorical mountain. The first part is identity declaration, not affirmation, declaration. The difference is everything. An affirmation says, I am becoming. A declaration says, I am. It sounds like semantics. It is not. The brain treats a statement about who you currently are very differently than it treats a promise about who you might one day become. The declaration does not need to feel true yet. It only needs to be stated as though it is already the operating premise. Marcus did not say, I want to become a sharp regional operator. He said, I am the person this business requires at its center. Then he asked what that person does next. The second part is systems design, not goal design. A goal is a destination. A system is the daily set of behaviors that a particular kind of person executes almost automatically. Marcus did not set a goal to call 10 prospects a week. The identity he had declared called 10 prospects a week, because that is what that kind of operator does. The way a gardener waters daily not because of a watering goal, but because that is what a gardener is. The behavior is inseparable from the identity. Remove the goal and the gardener still waters. Remove the goal from a goal setter and the watering stops. This is where the gardener appears in place of the architect. The architect draws a plan and measures reality against the drawing. The gardener works with what is alive in front of them, what needs pruning today, what is ready to grow now, what conditions changed since yesterday. The architect gets frustrated when reality deviates from the plan. The gardener expects deviation. Deviation is the job. The third part is the single question practiced daily. Who does this work require me to become? Not a prayer, not a visualization. A concrete, answerable question applied to whatever is currently in front of you. When the hard conversation needs to happen with the underperforming employee, who does this business require me to be in the next 10 minutes? When the investment looks risky and the feeling in your stomach is fear, who does this decision require me to be right now? The question does not guarantee the right answer. It guarantees you are asking on behalf of the work rather than on behalf of the fear. Here is where the open loop closes, and it closes harder than the question made it seem. You asked, at least silently, why outcome-first advice dominates if it does not work as well. The full answer is this: outcome-first advice is not designed to make you wealthy. It is designed to make you feel in the moment you consume it that wealth is achievable and near. That feeling is the product being sold. The actual wealth building happens somewhere quieter, in the space where your daily identity meets your daily work and the two become indistinguishable from each other. That space is not sellable. You cannot put it on a vision board. You cannot announce it to your mastermind group with a number and a date attached. It just compounds, quietly, the way small, consistent actions by a particular kind of person compound, not because they were chasing a number, but because that is who they were. Marcus still has the piece of paper from Carol. The goals he wrote at 31 are irrelevant now, not because he gave up, because he became the kind of person those goals were pointing toward, and that person kept going long after the goals had nothing left to say. You will hit your numbers, but not by watching the scoreboard. A little later, you will come to a point about motivation, specifically what it is actually for that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it immediately changes how you decide to spend the first hour of every workday. For now, the only question worth carrying into tomorrow morning is the one Carol wrote on a piece of paper and folded into Marcus's wallet. Who does this work require you to become? Chapter 4. The scoreboard is lying to you every single day. Right now, something is draining out of you that you cannot see. Not your energy, not your motivation, something more specific than that. Every time you check a number and feel behind, every time you look at where you are versus where you plan to be, a small but real cost is being paid. It is not the cost of falling short. It is the cost of looking up. Every second your eyes are on the scoreboard, they are off the game. And the game does not pause while you check. The distance grows while you watch the distance. This is not a metaphor. This is a measurable, documented mechanism. And if no one has ever named it plainly for you, that absence of information has been compounding quietly, daily, in every financial decision you have made since the first time someone taught you to set a goal and track a number. What you are about to understand changes how you execute, not just how you plan. That question from the last chapter, who does this work require you to become, is not asking about your resume. It is not asking what skills you need to acquire or what habits you need to install. It is asking something sharper. It is asking whether the person you are being, right now, in the middle of execution, is the kind of person who plays the game or the kind of person who watches it. Most people think they are doing both. They are not. Here is the open loop. There is a study from sports psychology, we will come back to the details, that reveals something so uncomfortable about how we perform under pressure that most coaches never share it with their athletes. Hold that thought. It matters. But first you need to meet James. James 𝗓𝗧𝗧 ran a small real estate wholesaling business out of a rented office space in Columbus, Ohio. He had 3 whiteboards. One tracked his monthly deal target. One tracked his year-to-date number versus his year-to-date goal. And the third showed a running calculation of what he needed to close in the remaining days of the month to hit his number. Every morning, James walked in and updated all 3. He was disciplined. He was data-driven. He was proud of the system. And for 18 months, James averaged exactly 62% of his monthly target, not 60, not 70, 62, consistent, frustratingly precisely consistent. He changed his scripts. He hired a coach. He read 4 books about sales. He adjusted his target twice, once up and once down, 62%. Finally, his landlord, a retired logistics manager named Gerald who rented desk space from the same suite, walked past James updating his boards one morning and said something that stopped James completely. Gerald said, "Every time I walk past, you are doing math. When do you make calls?" James stood in front of those whiteboards. He did the actual math, different math this time. He calculated how many minutes per day he spent updating, reviewing, calculating, and recalculating his numbers. It came to 41 minutes. 41 minutes every single workday. In 18 months, that was over 200 hours, more than 5 full working weeks, not 5 weeks of rest, 5 weeks of staring at the scoreboard instead of playing. He took down the second and third whiteboards the next morning. In 11 months after that, James closed at 91% of target for 7 consecutive months. Let that sit for a moment before we explain why. The sports psychology research mentioned earlier is the piece that makes this undeniable. Researchers studying basketball free throw performance under pressure found something the conventional performance world had backwards. Athletes coached to focus on the outcome, on making the shot, performed measurably worse under competitive pressure than athletes coached to focus entirely on process. The placement of the feet, the feel of the grip, the specific rhythm of the release, not the arc, not the net, the grip, the feet, the breath. This holds across disciplines. It has been replicated in golf putting, in penalty kicks, in competitive archery. The finding is not subtle. When your attention goes to the result you want, your body begins to manage that result instead of executing the action that produces it. Psychologists call it paralysis by evaluation. The body starts micro-correcting toward the desired outcome instead of executing the practiced movement. The score is not a feedback signal. Under pressure, the score is interference. Now apply that to your financial life. Return to the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were. Think about the number in your bank account on a Tuesday afternoon. Think about the decisions you made that week, what you pursued, what you avoided, what you told yourself was realistic. Now ask yourself how many of those decisions were influenced not by what was genuinely available to you, but by where you were on the scoreboard at that moment. How many conversations did you not have because the number said you were behind? How many risks did you not take because the gap between your goal and your reality felt too wide to bridge? How many weeks did you execute at 62% of your actual capacity because the board said you were losing? This is not about regret. This is about recognizing the mechanism. The mechanism is this. Outcome tracking mid-execution triggers something that looks like focus but functions as avoidance. When the number is good, you feel relief. When the number is bad, you feel urgency or dread. Neither of those emotional states produces your best execution. Relief relaxes pressure in the wrong direction. Dread constricts the thinking you need most. The scoreboard does not tell you what to do next. It only tells you how you feel about where you are. And how you feel about where you are has almost no relationship to what the next best action is. That is the invisible mechanism, not laziness, not lack of strategy. The scoreboard itself, installed as motivation, functioning as distortion. There is a distinction worth making here. There is a difference between measuring your inputs and measuring your outcomes. Measuring inputs means asking, how many calls did you make today? How many conversations did you start? How many offers did you prepare? How many hours did you give to the specific activity that drives results? Inputs are entirely within your control, every single one. Measuring outcomes means asking how much money did you make? How much did the portfolio move? How close are you to the goal? Outcomes are partially yours and partially not. The market moves, people cancel, timing fails you, weather delays the closing. When you use outcomes as your primary feedback signal, you are handing a portion of your internal compass to forces that do not care about your growth. The gardener does not measure harvest every morning. This is not a passive idea. The gardener works harder than almost anyone and in more specific ways. They test the soil. They water at the right time. They prune what is taking energy without producing. They watch the plant, not the calendar. The architect, by contrast, draws the finished building first and then tries to make reality match the drawing. When reality does not match, the architect adjusts the drawing, not the process. This is what happens when you track outcomes mid-execution. You adjust your vision of what is possible based on current results, rather than adjusting your daily inputs to improve future results. The scoreboard rewrites your belief about what you are capable of, and it does that quietly, invisibly, every single day you check it. Further on, you will come to a point about accountability that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it immediately changes every tracking system you have ever built for yourself. But for now, here is what matters practically. Presence compounds. This is not a spiritual statement. It is a functional one. Every unit of attention you direct toward execution is a unit that produces something real. Every unit you redirect toward scoreboard watching produces a feeling but not a result. The compound effect of full presence is not linear. It accelerates. Full presence in the action means you notice what is working faster. You adjust in real time. You catch the small signal before it becomes a large problem. You are in the game, not watching it from the press box with a calculator. James did not stop measuring entirely. He kept the first whiteboard. It showed his activity targets, calls made, offers sent, follow-ups completed. He updated it once at the end of the day. One review. No midday checking. No recalculating what he needed to close in the next 11 days. He only asked himself one question each evening. Did I do the work I said I would do today? Yes or no? That is the entire feedback loop. 91% for 7 consecutive months. The scoreboard did not change. The market did not become more generous. James did not get smarter or luckier. He simply stopped watching the game from the stands while he was supposed to be playing it. You have been taught that tracking outcomes is how you stay honest with yourself. That teaching came with good intentions, but it has been costing you something you cannot recover on a whiteboard. It has been costing you the quality of your execution, moment by moment, in the gap between what you are capable of and what the number made you believe was possible. The most precise way to accelerate your results is to stop watching them accumulate and start measuring only what you can actually control before the day ends. Watching the scoreboard mid-game is not discipline. It is the fastest way to start losing. So the question the next chapter answers is this: if you stop tracking the outcome, what exactly do you track instead? Chapter 5. The 3 systems that replace every goal you have. Tracking inputs, not outcomes, is the fastest route to the outcomes you actually want. That sounds like a riddle someone tells you when they have already given up on results. It is not. It is an observation about how a person who keeps hitting their numbers thinks about their day, versus how a person who keeps missing their numbers thinks about their day. One of them watches the scoreboard. The other watches the game. And the one watching the game, that is the one who keeps winning. You ended the last chapter with a question sitting unanswered. If you stop tracking the outcome, what exactly do you track instead? That question has a real answer, not a philosophical one. Not a motivational one, a structural one. 3 specific systems that, once installed, make every goal you have ever written on a whiteboard feel like a child's drawing of a bridge next to an actual bridge. You can admire the drawing, but you would not drive across it. This chapter gives you the bridge. Think about the last time you set a serious financial goal. Maybe it was a number, a savings target, an income figure, a net worth milestone. You wrote it down, maybe you told someone about it, maybe you felt that brief electric charge that comes right after setting a goal. And then, somewhere between week 2 and month 3, something happened. The number stopped feeling like a destination and started feeling like a verdict. Every week you were either on track or you were failing. There was no middle ground. The goal had become a judge and you were the one on trial. That cost you something. Not just the goal itself if you missed it. It cost you the week spent watching the scoreboard instead of playing. And the scoreboard, by its very nature, can only tell you what already happened. It cannot tell you what to do next. Here is what most people do not consider. The person who built something real, real money, real freedom, real compounding wealth, almost certainly had a different relationship with their daily actions than you have been taught to have. They were not motivated primarily by the gap between where they were and where they wanted to be. They were motivated by something closer to craft, by the satisfaction of executing a process well. The goal was not the engine. The process was the engine. The goal was just a general direction. 3 systems run that engine: the daily input loop, the identity anchor, the compounding review. Each one does a specific job. Together they make goals redundant, not because ambition disappears, but because you no longer need a goal to organize your effort. The system organizes your effort. The results follow the system the way water follows a channel. Let us start with the first one. The daily input loop is exactly what it sounds like. It is a small set of recurring actions, performed consistently, that you have predecided produce the financial outcomes you care about. Notice that word, predecided. You are not evaluating these actions every morning. You are not asking whether they are worth doing today. That decision was made once deliberately when your thinking was clear and your research was solid. Every morning after that, you are simply executing the decision that past you already made. Consider a woman named Petra. She ran a mid-sized catering business in a mid-sized city. For years, she tracked revenue targets, monthly numbers, quarterly projections. She had spreadsheets that would take your breath away. And every month, she either hit the number and felt brief relief, or missed the number and spent 2 weeks in a quiet spiral of doubt. After 7 years, her business was roughly the same size it had been at year 2. The spreadsheets had told her everything about what was happening. They had told her almost nothing about what to do. Then Petra stopped tracking revenue entirely. Instead, she identified 4 actions that, based on her best understanding of her own business, reliably preceded growth. 1 cold outreach conversation per day with a potential corporate client. 1 follow-up call with a lapsed customer per week. 1 hour every Sunday reviewing her cost structure. 1 conversation per month with her highest revenue client to understand what they actually valued. That was the loop. She ran it for 11 months without checking her annual revenue total once. At month 12, she looked. Revenue had grown 41%. What Petra had done without naming it was install a daily input loop. She stopped asking, did I hit the number? She started asking, did I do the 4 things? 1 is a verdict. The other is a question you can answer yes to right now, today, regardless of what the market is doing. Your daily input loop will not look like Petra's. It should not. But it shares one essential quality with hers. Every action in it is something fully within your control. Not revenue, not returns, not whether the client says yes. Those are outputs. The loop is made entirely of inputs. You own the inputs. The outputs take care of themselves over time in the same way a garden takes care of itself when the soil is right. The gardener does not control the fruit. The gardener controls the conditions. Now the second system, the identity anchor. This one is subtler. Most people who fail with systems fail right here. You can design a perfect daily input loop and still abandon it by month 2. Not because the actions are wrong, because your self-conception has not caught up with your behavior. You are doing the actions of a disciplined investor, a consistent builder, a person who shows up every day, but somewhere underneath, you still think of yourself as someone who is trying to become that person. Trying is a state of effort. Being is a state of default. The identity anchor is a single, plainly stated description of who you already are in relation to your financial behavior, not who you want to become. Who you are right now based on your actions. It is not an affirmation. Affirmations describe a wished-for future. The identity anchor describes a demonstrated present. Here is the distinction. An affirmation says, I am becoming someone who handles money with discipline. An identity anchor says, I am someone who runs the loop every day. One points forward. The other points at what you are already doing. The first requires faith. The second requires only honesty. Rewind to life 3 years ago and stay concrete in your relationship with money. The habits you had, the decisions you made, the stories you told yourself about why certain things were not possible yet. Now think about the person you are trying to build. The gap between those 2 points is real, and somewhere in that gap, you have probably tried to motivate yourself with a picture of the future version of you. The problem is that future person is a stranger. You do not automatically act in the interest of a stranger. You act in the interest of yourself. The identity anchor closes that gap. It makes the new behavior part of who you currently are, not who you are becoming, who you are, right now, based on evidence. Raphael was a freelance architect, not particularly wealthy, not in debt, somewhere in the careful middle of financial life. He wanted to invest consistently. He had tried automated transfers, goal trackers, accountability partners. Each one worked for a while and then quietly stopped. When he finally examined why, he found the same answer every time. He would look at his bank account, see a number lower than he expected, and tell himself, I am not really the kind of person who has money to invest right now. The story about who he was overrode the system every single time. Raphael built his identity anchor around a single sentence. He wrote it down once, and then he said it in his own mind every time he executed his loop. The sentence was this: I am someone who invests before I spend every month without exception, not because he had always done that. He had not, but because he had done it 3 months in a row. 3 months was enough evidence to justify the claim, and once the claim was justified, it became self-reinforcing. Missing the investment felt like a violation of who he was, not a failure to hit a target. That is a completely different kind of motivation. It is the kind that does not erode. The third system is the compounding review. Here is the open loop this chapter has been carrying since the first few paragraphs. The scoreboard was introduced as a problem, the thing that turns your goal into a judge. But you still need some way to evaluate whether your systems are working. You cannot fly entirely blind. So how do you look at results without letting results run you? The compounding review answers that. It is a scheduled, infrequent, structured look at whether your inputs are producing the outputs you expected over a meaningful period of time. Not weekly, not monthly. Quarterly at most, and for some decisions, annually. The frequency matters. A daily check of your investment account is not a review, it is surveillance. Surveillance triggers the part of your brain that manages threats, not the part that makes good decisions. The compounding review has 3 questions and only 3. First, Did I execute the loop consistently? Second, are the outputs trending in the right direction over this full period, not just this week? Third, does anything in the system need adjustment based on what I now know that I did not know when I designed the loop? Notice what is not in those questions. There is no, why did the number not hit my projection? There is no, am I behind? There is no comparison to a goal. The review is a systems audit, not a performance review. You are not on trial. You are the engineer checking whether the machine is calibrated. The billionaire in the title of this book, and you will see, as the chapters continue, that the title is not metaphor but a compressed description of a real pattern across multiple real people, did not get to double net worth by checking their scoreboard more carefully. They got there by making the scoreboard increasingly irrelevant to their daily behavior. The scoreboard became something they glanced at once in a while, the way you glance at the weather after you have already gotten dressed. Interesting. Not governing. Soon, you will come to a point about motivation, specifically about what makes you push harder when results are slow. After that clicks, it immediately changes what you do on your worst weeks that clashes with the familiar story. But for now, stay with this. 3 well-designed systems make every goal you have ever had redundant, not because the destination stops mattering, because the system gets you there without requiring you to stare at the distance that remains. The loop tells you what to do today. The anchor tells you who you are while you do it. The review tells you whether the machine is working. You do not need anything else. What happens, though, when the machine stalls, when you execute the loop faithfully and the outputs do not follow the way you expected? Chapter 6. Why the best investors never watch prices daily. Something is draining out of your financial life right now. It is not dramatic enough to feel like an emergency. It is quiet. It is daily. And because it does not announce itself, most people never trace it back to the actual cause. The money you are losing is not being taken by the market. It is not being lost to inflation, not exactly. It is being destroyed by the way you are paying attention. Every time you open that app and check the number, something happens inside your decision-making. It costs you more than the number itself reveals. Not this week, not even this year, but compounded across a decade, across 20 years, the damage done by how often you look is measurable, documented, and staggering. And the worst part is that checking feels responsible. It feels like diligence. It has been sold to you as diligence. That is the invisible mechanism. The behavior that feels like protection is the exact behavior producing the loss. This chapter is going to show you why. And when you see it clearly, you will never look at a portfolio the same way again. There is a question worth sitting with before we go further. What happens when the machine stalls? When you have built the loop, you are executing faithfully. You are doing the right things in the right order, and the outputs still do not appear on schedule. The previous chapter left you standing at that edge. And the honest answer is not what most financial advice prepares you for. The answer lives inside what the best investors in documented history actually did differently from everyone else. Not what they said. What they did, and more importantly, what they refused to do. In 1994, a researcher named 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡 ran a study with Richard Thaler at the University of Chicago. They looked at how often investors checked their portfolios and then tracked what happened to their long-term returns afterward. The finding was not subtle. Investors who checked their portfolios daily earned measurably lower returns than investors who checked quarterly or annually, even when both groups held identical assets. Same stocks, same funds, different behavior, different outcomes. The daily checkers traded more. They reacted to noise they mistook for signal. They sold during dips that would have recovered within months and sat out rallies they were too rattled to believe in. The portfolio itself was not the variable. The attention directed at the portfolio was the variable. Bring yourself back to the financial instincts you were carrying 3 years earlier, as honestly as you can. What you were watching, what you were reacting to, what decisions you made based on a number you saw on a screen at a particular moment. Now think about what those decisions cost you, not in regret, but in the actual compounding that did not happen because you moved when you should have stayed still. That is the mirror this chapter holds up. The mechanism has a name. Behavioral economists call it myopic loss aversion. Break that down. Myopic means short-sighted. Loss aversion is the well-documented human tendency to feel losses roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains. Put them together and you get a system where someone who checks their portfolio every day is guaranteed to see more losses, feel each one at double intensity, and make decisions from that emotionally activated state. The market does not have to be going down for this to happen. Normal daily fluctuation is enough. A perfectly healthy, growing portfolio will show red on roughly 46% of all individual days. If you are watching every day, you are experiencing fear almost half the time about something that does not require fear. You are training your nervous system to treat growth as dangerous. A gardener does not dig up the seed every morning to see if the root has formed. Not because gardeners are incurious, but because they understand that the checking disrupts the process it claims to monitor. Every time you pull the seed up, you break contact with the soil. You introduce oxygen where pressure is needed. You interrupt the very conditions you created in order to verify that those conditions are working. The gardener's discipline is not passivity. It is a sophisticated understanding that presence, in that particular context, compounds into interference. Here is the part that most financial advice skips entirely. Daily price watching is goal chasing wearing different clothes. When you check a number, you are not simply gathering data. You are asking a question. And the question is, am I there yet? That is goal orientation. That is the scoreboard. You are not watching the game. You are watching the score. And as any athlete who has collapsed a lead by scoreboard watching will tell you, the score does not tell you what to do next. The score tells you how things were a moment ago. It creates urgency where strategy is needed. It narrows your focus to the outcome at the exact moment your focus needs to be on the process. A man named Daniel ran a mid-size landscaping business in Raleigh for 11 years. He was not a financial professional. He had about $60,000 in a brokerage account, money he had saved in the chaotic years of building his company, and he watched it every single day. He had a routine, coffee, laptop, portfolio. He told himself he was being responsible. He told himself that men who built things from nothing had to stay vigilant. In 2020, when the market dropped 34% in 33 days, Daniel sold. Not everything, but most of it. He could not watch the number go down any further. He waited for things to feel safer. And by the time they felt safer, the recovery had already happened without him. He missed 41% of the rebound while sitting in cash. His $60,000, if he had simply left it alone and never looked, would have been worth just over $93,000 by mid-2021. He ended that period with $68,000. The $25,000 difference was not taken by the crash. The crash recovered. The difference was taken by the watching. Daniel is not foolish. Daniel is human. And the financial system never told him that his diligence was the problem. The investors who do not watch prices daily are not less interested in their money. They are more serious about it. They have separated the question of process from the question of outcome. They have placed their full attention on the one they can actually influence. Fidelity Investments, in an internal review of account performance that circulated among researchers for years, reportedly found that their best-performing accounts were ones where the holder had either forgotten about them entirely or had died. That finding is not a morbid joke. It is one of the clearest data points available on what happens when the monitoring instinct is fully removed. The accounts that nobody touched outperformed accounts with active, attentive holders, not by a little. Now here is the open loop this chapter has been building toward since the second paragraph. When the machine stalls, what do? When you execute the loop, you show up for the process, you plant the seeds, and 30 days pass without visible output. What is the right response? The answer is almost never to check more often, almost never to intervene. The stall itself is usually not the problem. The reaction to the stall is where most of the damage happens. This is true in business, in wealth building, and in investing specifically. The period of no visible movement is not evidence that the process has failed. It is often evidence that the process is doing its least visible and most important work. Root systems form underground. Returns compound in fractions before they compound visibly. The gardener who digs too early does not get answers. The gardener who digs too early gets a ruined garden. There is a practical architecture to this. Investors who build real, sustained wealth over decades tend to operate on review schedules that feel almost reckless to the daily watcher, quarterly at most, some annually. They set allocations based on logic, not on emotion. Then they create friction between themselves and the ability to make reactive changes. One way they do this is by removing the apps from their phones. Another is by setting automatic contributions that require active steps to cancel, not active steps to continue. They engineer their attention away from the scoreboard because they know, from experience or from research or from both, that scoreboard watching produces scoreboard anxiety, and scoreboard anxiety produces exactly the wrong decisions at exactly the wrong moments. Later on, you will come to a point about urgency and financial momentum that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, it immediately changes how fast you actually try to move. For now, notice what daily price watching actually is. It is not information gathering. Information changes on schedules that daily checking cannot usefully track. It is anxiety management pretending to be strategy. You check because the uncertainty feels intolerable, not because the check produces better decisions. And the checking never resolves the uncertainty. It feeds it. Every session with the number opens the question again. Are we okay? Is this working? Should I do something? The question never gets a satisfying answer because the only answer that would satisfy is a guarantee. And the number on the screen is never a guarantee. It is a moment, just a single moment in a process that operates across years. Presence compounds. You heard that phrase earlier in these pages, and here is where its investment meaning becomes concrete. Presence in your process compounds. Presence in your outcomes, staring at the score, depletes the very attention that needs to stay on the game. The scoreboard did not build the lead. The plays built the lead, and the plays require you to be looking at the field. The principle underneath all of this is quieter than it first appears. The investors who do not watch prices daily are not more detached from their money. They are more committed to it, committed enough to protect it from their own most human and most expensive impulse. Stop watching the seed. Trust what you planted. Chapter 7. The Gardener Principle of Building Wealth Quietly. Paying close attention to your money is one of the most reliable ways to slow its growth. That sounds like irresponsible advice dressed up in calm language. It is not. It is a precise observation about what happens inside a system when the person running that system cannot stop interfering with it, checking it, pulling at it to see if anything has changed, and what that constant interference costs them over years they never get back. You already heard the instruction at the end of the last chapter. Stop watching the seed. Trust what you planted. But trusting something you cannot see goes against every instinct you have been trained to act on. You were taught that attention equals results. You were taught that monitoring means control. And so the idea that stepping back could accelerate what you are trying to build, that silence and patience and a certain kind of disciplined neglect might be more powerful than vigilance, sits wrong in your chest. It sounds like giving up. It sounds like the sort of thing people say when they have already lost. Here is what this chapter is going to show you. It is not giving up. It is the mechanism. And once you understand it, you will never look at your finances the same way again. There is a question worth sitting with before going any further. Have you ever worked hard at something, checked on it constantly, and somehow ended up with less than someone who appeared to do almost nothing? Hold that question. The answer is coming, but not yet. Think for a moment about the two dominant images people use when they talk about building wealth. The first image is the architect. Blueprints, measurements, every variable accounted for in advance. A fixed plan executed with precision. Most financial advice is built around this image. Set the goal, map the steps, hit each milestone. There is a comfort in it. The architect knows where the building will stand before the first stone is laid. You can point to the blueprint. You can feel in control, even before anything exists. The second image almost nobody teaches. The gardener does not know exactly what the garden will look like in 3 years. The gardener cannot blueprint a harvest the way an architect blueprints a wall. What the gardener can do is understand the conditions that allow living things to grow, the quality of the soil, the timing of water, the space between plants, the patience required when nothing visible is happening above ground. The gardener does not control the outcome. The gardener controls the environment, and that distinction is everything. Here is what most people miss about wealthy individuals who built quietly, without public fanfare, without quarterly goal announcements and vision boards on the bathroom mirror. They were not lucky. They were not passive. They were gardeners. They understood that the job is not to force growth. The job is to create the conditions where growth becomes almost inevitable, and then get out of the way. Consider a man named Marcus Ellery. He was an accountant in a mid-sized city, 41 years old, earning a solid but unremarkable salary. His colleagues were savers in the traditional sense. They tracked every dollar in spreadsheets, set annual targets, reviewed their portfolios on Sunday mornings over coffee, adjusting allocations when the market moved in ways that made them nervous. Marcus did something different. He spent 18 months building what he called his conditions. He automated savings at a fixed percentage before he ever saw the money. He set up a small index fund contribution that required 0 decisions from him once it was running. He created one rule about spending, not a budget, not a limit, just one rule, and he never broke it. Then he stopped looking. Not forever. Quarterly. He checked quarterly, made small adjustments, and otherwise turned his attention entirely to the quality of his daily work and one side project he found genuinely interesting. 5 years later, his net worth had grown at nearly twice the rate of his colleagues who were tracking daily. They could not understand it. They were monitoring. They were engaged. They were doing everything the financial planning industry told them to do. Marcus, meanwhile, had built a garden and gone inside. The lesson is not that Marcus was smarter. Let that land for a moment before moving on. The lesson is that his colleagues were doing something that felt like wealth building, but was actually wealth interrupting. Every time they logged in and felt anxiety about a down week, they made small, fearful decisions. Every time they restructured their plan after a bad month, they reset the compounding clock. Every time they pulled the root to check the growth, they disrupted the system that was trying to work for them. They were architects who kept tearing down the walls to see if the foundation was still there. What does it actually mean to create the right conditions? This is where the gardener principle moves from metaphor to mechanism. There are 3 layers to it. They stack on each other in a specific order. The first layer is soil. In a real garden, poor soil produces poor results regardless of how much attention you give the plants. In your financial life, the soil is your base system, the structure underneath everything else. This is where money moves automatically before it touches your discretionary life. This is the non-negotiable percentage that leaves your account the same day your income arrives, not after you pay bills, not after you see what is left, first before anything else. Poor soil means you are always trying to grow something in dirt that cannot hold water. Most people have poor soil because they built their financial life around what was left over, not what was set aside first. You cannot garden in leftovers. The second layer is spacing. Plants placed too close together compete for the same nutrients. They crowd each other. They limit what each one can become. In your financial life, spacing means you are not running too many financial initiatives at the same time. One investment account fully funded before opening another. One debt addressed with full force before splitting your attention. The obsession with diversifying early, with having multiple strategies running simultaneously, often feels like productivity and produces the opposite. Space allows each thing you plant to draw fully from the resources available. Crowd the garden and you harvest half of everything instead of all of something. The third layer is the hardest. Restraint from interference. Call to mind to your financial footing 3 years earlier without drifting into anything else. Think about what you were watching, tracking, checking, adjusting. Think about the decisions you made out of anxiety or impatience. The thing you sold when it dipped. The account you restructured when you read an article that scared you. The plan you abandoned 6 weeks in because results were not visible yet. Now ask yourself honestly how much of your financial life over those 3 years was actual tending, and how much was pulling up roots to see if they had grown. That is the mirror. Hold it steady. Restraint from interference is not passivity. This distinction matters, and it is subtle. A gardener who never waters is not practicing restraint. That gardener is neglecting. The difference is that a disciplined gardener does specific, necessary, timed actions, and then deliberately does not add to them. Watering on schedule and then walking away is an active choice. Logging into your brokerage account during a volatile week and making no trades is an active choice. The person who never opens the account is not practicing restraint. They are avoiding. The person who opens it, sees the red, and closes it without touching anything, that is gardening. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about discipline and money that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it immediately changes how you act on even your best financial days. The goal-setting culture, the one that sells you planners and frameworks and 5-year roadmaps with quarterly check-ins, is built on an architect's assumption. The assumption is that a clearly defined endpoint mapped in advance is what produces results. But wealth is not a building. Wealth is alive. It responds to conditions, not blueprints. And the conditions that produce it most reliably are quieter than you have been led to believe. Patience without anxiety. Systems without constant supervision. Attention that is timed, not constant. There is a particular kind of faith required for this. Not blind faith, the gardener knows the science. They know what soil does, what water does, what light does. The faith is not in magic. The faith is in the process that has already been validated, already set in motion, already working beneath the surface in ways that have not yet become visible. The person who digs up a seed to check if it has sprouted does not lack faith in the seed. They lack faith in the time between planting and harvest. That interval, that invisible, uneventful, sometimes maddening stretch where nothing appears to be happening, is precisely where the real growth occurs. Wealth grows in the dark. When the conditions are right, when the soil holds, when interference is withheld, the compounding that everyone talks about in theory finally gets enough uninterrupted time to become real in your account. Most people never experience it, not because they did not plant, but because they could not stop digging. You are being prepared here for something specific, not a new goal, not a better plan, a new identity. The shift from architect to gardener is not a strategy change. It is a self-concept change. It is the difference between someone who manages an outcome and someone who stewards a system. Architects chase the blueprint. Gardeners tend the ground. Now here is where the open loop closes. Earlier the question was this: have you ever worked harder than someone and ended up with less? Yes. Because they were gardening while you were architecturing. They built the conditions once, protected them, and let time do the heavy work. You rebuilt the plan every time results did not arrive on schedule. The gap between you was not effort. It was interference. The garden does not need you to watch it. It needs you to trust what you planted, tend what requires tending, and stay out of the ground. Chapter 8. Identity is the only goal worth having. Right now, while you are listening to this, something is draining. Not dramatically, not with any noise or warning. Quietly, the way water disappears from a glass left on a windowsill for 3 days. You do not notice the loss until the glass is nearly empty. The thing draining is not just your money. It is your operating capacity. Every week you spend chasing a number on a goal sheet rather than becoming a specific kind of person. You are spending energy on the scoreboard instead of the game. And the scoreboard does not pay you. The game does. Here is the tension that nobody in the goal-setting industry has any financial incentive to tell you. The goals themselves may be the mechanism of your stagnation, not your effort, not your commitment. The structure you were handed and told was the only way to build something real. What you are about to hear did not come from a motivational stage. It came from a single ordinary morning when a man stopped consulting his list and noticed, for the first time in years, that he could breathe. That is where we begin. The previous chapter left you with a gardener's instruction. Trust what you planted. Tend what requires tending. Stay out of the ground. That sounds peaceful in theory. In practice, for most people, it lasts about 4 hours before the anxiety creeps back in. Before you open the spreadsheet, before you check the number, before you ask yourself the question that feels like diligence but functions like doubt: am I still on track? James Callaway, a commercial property developer operating out of a mid-sized city in the American Southeast, asked himself that question every single morning for 11 years. He had a whiteboard in his office: revenue targets, acquisition goals, net worth checkpoints with dates attached. Every year he updated the numbers. Every year he hit some of them, missed others, felt briefly good about the wins, and immediately uncomfortable about the gaps. His accountant thought he was disciplined. His wife thought he was obsessed. James thought he was both, and that the combination was just the price of success. Then came the morning in question. It was a Tuesday in early October, not a dramatic morning. No crisis, no revelation handed down from anywhere. James had simply forgotten, genuinely forgotten, to consult the whiteboard before his first call of the day. By the time he remembered, 2 hours had passed. In those 2 hours, he had made 3 decisions. One about a contractor he needed to let go. One about a property he had been hesitating on for 6 weeks. And one about a conversation with a lender he had been delaying for reasons he could not fully name. 3 decisions. 2 hours. No scoreboard consulted. He sat back in his chair after the 3rd call. Something felt different. Not better exactly. Just cleaner. The decisions had come from somewhere other than the goal sheet. They had come from something he could only describe later as a sense of who he was trying to be in that business, not what he was trying to get. That difference is the whole chapter, right there. Here is the open question, and it matters enough to plan it now and let it sit. If you removed every financial target from your life for 30 days, would you make better decisions or worse ones? Hold that question. Do not answer it yet. We will come back to it, and when we do, the answer will probably not be what you expect. Now, most people, when they hear someone suggest that goals might be the wrong tool, get defensive. And the defensiveness makes sense. You were taught by schools, by business books, by every productivity framework sold in airport bookstores, that clarity of outcome is the foundation of success. You were taught that if you can see the number, you can hit the number. Write it down. Attach a date. Measure it. Review it quarterly. This framework is not wrong because it is lazy. It is wrong because it optimizes for the wrong thing entirely. It optimizes for the result rather than for the person generating the result. Picture the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not in terms of your bank account, that is the scoreboard again. Think about who you were, how you made decisions, what you said yes to, what you could not bring yourself to say no to. The version of you from 3 years ago had financial goals too, probably. Written down, maybe. And yet here you are 3 years later still running into versions of the same friction, the same hesitation, the same conversations you keep having with yourself about whether you are doing this right. The goals changed. You more slowly. And that gap between the changing goals and the slowly changing person is exactly where the drain lives. Identity is not a soft concept. Do not let the word fool you. Identity, as a financial and operational force, is one of the hardest and most precise things you can build. It functions like infrastructure. When your roads are right, traffic moves. You do not have to will the cars forward. You do not have to incentivize them with targets. The structure of the road does the work. Here is a parable. A woman named Carla had been running a small logistics company for 8 years. She had goals every single year, growth targets, margin goals, client acquisition numbers. And every year she hit around 60 to 70% of them. That felt like near enough success. But it tasted like consistent disappointment. She hired a consultant once who told her the goals were not specific enough. So she made them more specific. She hit 63% that year. The consultant said she needed better systems. She built better systems. She hit 68% the next year. The percentage barely moved. The work increased. Then one evening, after a long day, she was on a call with a client she had worked with for 4 years. The client said something Carla had never been told before. He said, "The reason I keep coming back to you is that I always know exactly how you will handle a problem before the problem happens." Carla sat with that sentence for a long time. What the client was describing was not her goals. It was not her systems. It was her character as an operator, the predictable, specific way she showed up inside difficulty. A week later, she rewrote her entire business description. Not her goals, not her strategy. She wrote down as precisely as she could what kind of operator she was, how she made decisions under pressure, what she would never trade for a short-term gain, what she considered non-negotiable, and how she treated vendors, clients, time, and money. Within 18 months, her client retention was up by 40%. She had stopped hitting 60% of her goals because she had stopped writing goals the old way. She was running entirely from the description of who she was. The numbers followed without being chased. After a parable like that, the temptation is to immediately hand you the instruction manual. But the instruction is not the point yet. Let the story settle for a moment. What Carla found was not a productivity hack. It was something older and more durable than that. Here is what most people miss about identity as a financial tool. When your identity is clear and specific, it compresses decision-making time dramatically. Every hesitation you feel around a financial decision is, at its root, an identity question you have not answered. Should I take this contract? Should I hold this asset or sell? Should I hire this person or stay lean? These questions look financial on the surface. They are not. They are questions about what kind of operator you are. If you know the answer to that question in advance, if it is so well defined that you could explain it to a stranger in 3 sentences, then the financial decision is not really a decision at all. It is a consequence of who you are. You do not agonize, you execute. And that is the revelation James Calloway arrived at, sitting in his office on a Tuesday in October with the whiteboard untouched behind him. The 2-hour stretch of clear decisions had not come from ignoring his goals. They had come from operating entirely as the person he had spent 11 years slowly, quietly becoming. The goals had always been proxies for that person, imprecise proxies, the kind of proxies you need when you do not yet have the real thing. But at some point, somewhere in 11 years of building and losing and rebuilding, he had become someone specific enough that the proxy was no longer necessary. The scoreboard had been his training wheels. He had not noticed when he no longer needed them. Now go back to the question planted earlier in this chapter. If you removed every financial target from your life for 30 days, would you make better decisions or worse ones? The honest answer for most people right now is worse. And that is not a failure. It is diagnostic information. It tells you that your identity as an operator is not yet defined clearly enough to function without the external scaffold. The goal list is doing work that you have not yet been able to do from the inside. That is not a permanent condition, but it is the exact place to start. Not with a better goal, not with a more ambitious number, but with a precise description of the kind of person whose natural behavior produces the outcomes you want as a side effect. In a later section, you will come to a point about discipline that clashes with the familiar story. After that really registers, it immediately changes how you decide to spend your next Monday morning. But for now, here is the thing to carry with you from this chapter. Not as a goal. As a description. When your identity is correct, results are not a goal. They are a side effect. So the question is not what do you want to build. The question that actually compounds is, who builds that and are you becoming them? Chapter 9. The compounding review that replaces goal check-ins. Checking your progress more often does not make you more likely to succeed. That sounds like an excuse to stop paying attention. It is not. It is a precise observation about what happens inside your head every time you measure where you are against where you thought you would be by now. and why that measurement, repeated weekly, can quietly destroy the very system that was working. You have been told to track everything. Review your numbers, keep a scoreboard. Celebrate the wins, diagnose the losses, adjust accordingly. Every productivity course, every finance influencer, every goal-setting workbook tells you the same thing. If you want to hit your target, stay close to it. Watch the gap, shrink the gap, repeat. But here is what none of them tell you. The act of constantly measuring distance to a destination changes how you move. It makes you anxious when you are behind and complacent when you are ahead. It turns your attention toward the scoreboard and away from the game. And the game is where compounding actually lives. This chapter is about replacing that scoreboard habit with something more precise. Something that asks not how far have you come, but whether the engine underneath you is healthy and getting stronger. That is a completely different question. And it produces completely different results. The previous chapter left you with this. The question that compounds is not what do you want to build, but who builds that, and are you becoming them? Hold that. Because the compounding review is the weekly practice that answers it with evidence instead of feeling. Here is the open loop. Some of you have tried weekly reviews before. Journals, spreadsheets, Sunday planning sessions with color-coded categories. And at some point you stopped. Or the review became a ritual that felt good but produced nothing. Before this chapter ends, you will understand exactly why those attempts collapsed. And it was not a discipline problem. Revisit the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were. Think about what you tracked. Think about whether tracking it made any difference, or whether the real changes came from something else entirely. A habit that quietly strengthened. A relationship that opened a door. A skill you practiced without a deadline attached. If you are honest, most of the real progress came from systems you barely noticed running in the background. The review you were doing was measuring the wrong thing. That is the recognition, and it has a cost. When you track milestones, you are tracking outcomes you cannot directly control. You control your actions. You do not control the market, the timing, the client's mood, the algorithm, or the economy. So every week when you sit down and measure the gap between where you are and where your goal said you would be, you are grading yourself on a test written by forces outside your reach. Sometimes you pass, often you do not, and the emotional weight of failing that test accumulates invisibly. Marcus was an independent financial consultant, 31 years old, sharp, genuinely good at his work. He had a goal to reach 12 clients by June. He tracked it every Sunday: current clients, pipeline contacts, proposals sent, conversion rate. He knew the numbers cold. He was at 7 clients by May. The gap was real, and the gap was all he could see. What he could not see was that his follow-up system had quietly gotten much faster over the prior 3 months. His initial consultation process had become so smooth that prospective clients were making decisions in 1 call instead of 3. His referral rate had tripled, though he had never measured it. The machine underneath him was accelerating, but the scoreboard said he was behind. So he panicked. He discounted his rates, rushed his process, took on 2 clients who were wrong fits. Both left within 90 days. By September, he was back to 6 clients and genuinely confused about why working harder had made things worse. The machine was healthy. He broke the machine trying to force the score. 1 moment before the lesson lands directly. Notice what Marcus did not do. He never asked whether his system was strengthening. He asked whether his number was rising. And those are not the same question. The compounding review is a protocol, not a journal. It has a specific structure. Sunday evening, 20 minutes, 3 questions asked in order. Not 4, not 2, 3 in order because the sequence matters. The first question is, did my core behaviors run this week? Not did I feel motivated. Not did I make progress. Did the behaviors that constitute my system actually execute? You are looking for a yes or no on each behavior, nothing more. If you have 3 core behaviors, a daily financial review, a weekly outreach habit, a specific learning block, you are checking whether each one happened. You are not grading quality yet. You are not measuring outcomes. You are confirming presence. Why does this question come first? Because presence is the foundation of compounding. A habit that ran imperfectly 5 times this week is worth more than a perfect habit that ran once. Frequency builds the groove. The groove reduces friction. Reduced friction means the behavior starts to run almost on its own. Presence compounds. This is the gardener's work. You show up and water, not because you can see the root growing, but because you know the root is growing. The second question is, did any behavior feel harder or easier than last week? This is the health signal. When a behavior that used to take effort starts to feel automatic, your system is strengthening. That is the signal you are looking for. When a behavior that used to feel easy suddenly feels like a burden, something upstream has changed, your energy, your environment, your clarity on why it matters. You need to know that. This question is where most weekly reviews fail. They measure outputs, money earned, deals closed, pounds lost. The compounding review measures the friction level of the input behavior, because friction level is a leading indicator. It tells you what is about to happen before the scoreboard shows it. A system with decreasing friction is about to compound. A system with increasing friction is about to break down. You want to know which one you are living inside before the numbers confirm it months later. The third question is, does anything in my environment need to change to protect next week's behaviors? Not what do I need to do differently. What does the environment need? The most common reason a behavior collapses is not willpower, it is context. A meeting that now occupies the time you used to protect. A notification that interrupts the focused block. A financial tracking app you stopped opening because it became emotionally charged. The behavior is fine. The context broke. Fix the context. Those 3 questions take 20 minutes if you are honest. They take 8 minutes if you let yourself be vague. The value lives in the honesty, not the speed. Here is something worth pausing on. The compounding review does not ask whether you hit a milestone. It never mentions your goal. It does not compare this week to a projection you made 4 months ago with imperfect information. The conventional check-in is a trial where you are both defendant and judge, and the evidence is always outcome data you cannot fully control. The compounding review is a diagnostic, like a doctor checking vitals. The doctor does not ask whether your blood pressure matches the number you wrote in a journal in January. The doctor asks whether your body's systems are functioning and whether they are trending toward health or away from it. That is the shift. From verdict to diagnosis. Now back to the open loop. Why did your previous weekly reviews collapse? Not because you lacked discipline. They collapsed because they were asking questions that made you feel bad without giving you anything actionable to do. When you measure the gap between your goal and your reality and the gap is wide, what do you do with that information? Usually nothing specific. You feel the weight of it. You carry it into the next week. And the weight makes every action slightly heavier. The review was supposed to help, and instead it was slowly leaking your energy. That is why you stopped. Not weakness. Accurate feedback from your own nervous system that the process was costing more than it was producing. The compounding review costs nothing. It asks 3 clean questions. It gives you 3 clean answers. It tells you whether to maintain, adjust, or fix something specific. Then you close the notebook and go live your week, free of the scoreboard's noise. One more thing. The Sunday timing is not arbitrary. Sunday evening sits at the edge of 2 weeks simultaneously. It is far enough from the previous week to have perspective and close enough to the next week to make environmental adjustments before the week begins. Monday morning is too late. Friday is too early. Sunday evening is the natural hinge point. Before long, you will come to a point about motivation, specifically where it comes from and when it arrives that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it immediately changes when you choose to act and why. But right now, the point is this. You have spent years checking the scoreboard. You know how it feels to see yourself behind. You know the particular hollowness of a weekly review that confirms you missed another benchmark. That hollowness is not a motivational problem. It is a measurement problem. You are measuring the right destination with the wrong instrument. The compounding review gives you the right instrument. Not a ruler measuring the distance to a point on the horizon, but a stethoscope pressed against the system that moves you forward. Ask not, am I hitting my goal? Ask, is my system healthy, and is it getting stronger? Chapter 10. How Presence Became the Billionaire's Greatest Asset. Something is slipping through your hands right now, and it is not dramatic enough to feel like loss. It does not announce itself. There is no alarm, no moment where you know clearly that you missed something. It moves quietly. Every hour you spend staring at a number that is not yet what you want it to be is an hour you were not fully inside the work that produces the number. Multiply that by every week this year, every year this decade. The cost is not just time, it is signal. The signals your work sends you when you are actually present inside it. The friction you would have noticed. The opening you would have caught. The small compounding correction you would have made on a Tuesday morning in November that would have quietly doubled your output by spring. You missed it, not because you are careless, because your attention was somewhere else. It was on the scoreboard, and the scoreboard, it turns out, is the most expensive place to look. A question was waiting for you at the end of the last chapter, not a soft question, a diagnostic one. Is my system healthy and is it getting stronger? That question asks you to look at the living thing, not the record of what it has produced. But there is a deeper question hidden inside it. One that will take the rest of this chapter to answer. What does it actually mean to be inside your system, fully, rather than watching it from a distance and hoping for numbers? The answer is not mystical. It is mechanical. Consider Marcus Olden. He ran a mid-sized commercial printing company outside of Cincinnati for 11 years. Nothing romantic about the business. Paper, ink, contracts, deadlines, margins thin enough to make a CFO sweat. For most of those 11 years, Marcus ran the company the way he had been taught. Annual revenue targets, quarterly reviews, monthly goals broken into weekly actions. He had a whiteboard in his office with numbers on it. Those numbers told him whether he was winning or losing. He reviewed them every Monday morning. He adjusted when they dipped. He celebrated when they climbed. Then came the year he almost sold the business. The numbers had been flat for 3 consecutive quarters, not catastrophically flat, just flat enough to feel like evidence that the company had reached its ceiling. Marcus had a buyer, reasonable offer. He was tired in the way that only a person who has been watching a scoreboard for a decade straight can be tired. The night before he was supposed to call his attorney and begin the process, he stayed late at the plant. No particular reason. He just was not ready to go home. He walked the floor. He watched his team run the machines. And because he was not there with an agenda, because he was not there to review performance or enforce a target, he was simply present. He noticed something he had seen 100 times but never truly seen. His fastest operator, a woman named Delia who had worked there for 6 years, was doing something subtle with the feeder mechanism that cut her setup time in half. She had developed her own technique. She had never told anyone, not because she was selfish, because no one had ever asked her what she actually did. Marcus did not sell the company. He spent 6 weeks working beside Delia, learning what she knew, documenting it, teaching it to the other operators. Within 4 months, throughput on that floor increased by 31%, not because of a new goal, not because of a new strategy session or a revised quarterly target. Because he had been present enough for one quiet evening to see what was already there. Let that land for a moment without explanation. That is the thing about presence. It does not feel like a strategy. It feels like showing up. But showing up fully, inside the actual mechanics of your system, is one of the most precise economic decisions you can make. The goal-obsessed mind would have missed Delia entirely. It was somewhere else. In the future, calculating whether the next quarter would be better, rehearsing conversations with buyers, measuring the gap between where the company was and where the target said it should be. That mental location, the future, the scoreboard, the gap, is a place where signals cannot reach you. Signals live in the present. They live in the texture of the work. In the small deviations and surprises and unexpected competencies that only reveal themselves to someone who is actually there to receive them. Call up the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not your bank account, not your title, not your goals. Think about what you were doing at 2 in the afternoon on an ordinary Wednesday. What was your attention on? Were you inside the work, or were you measuring it from a distance? Were you in the meeting, or were you thinking about whether the meeting would move the needle? Were you in the conversation, or were you calculating whether the conversation was worth your time? Because the gap between those two modes is not small. Over 3 years, that gap becomes the difference between a system that gave you everything it had and a system you barely touched. Here is the claim that most people resist. Presence is not a spiritual concept in wealth building. It is a compounding mechanism. Say that again slowly in your own mind. A compounding mechanism, not a mood, not a practice from a meditation app, a mechanism. The same way interest is a mechanism. The same way reputation is a mechanism. When you are fully present inside your system, you receive information. That information allows you to make small, precise corrections. Those corrections improve the system's output. The improved output generates better information, and the cycle accelerates. But when your attention is fixed on the future result rather than the present process, the feedback loop breaks. You receive less information. Your corrections are slower and blunter. The system degrades quietly. And you do not notice because you are watching the scoreboard, not the game. The scoreboard tells you the score. The game is where the score is produced. You have heard versions of this idea before. Be present. Stay in the moment. These phrases have been smoothed into meaninglessness by repetition. So set them aside. Think about it as a capital allocation problem. You have a fixed amount of attention every day. That attention is your most liquid and perishable asset. Where you spend it determines the quality of the information you receive. And the quality of information you receive determines the quality of the decisions you make. Decisions made from rich, present-tense information are better decisions. They compound better. A system tended by someone whose attention is fully inside, it is a different and more productive organism than a system tended by someone who is perpetually checking whether it has reached the target yet. The gardener is not looking at a photograph of what the garden will look like when it is done. The gardener is looking at the soil, at the leaves, at the color of things that are about to fail, and the unexpected vitality of things that were not supposed to thrive. The gardener is in constant informational contact with the living thing. That contact is the competitive advantage. This is what the billionaire archetype understood that most of the people around him never did. When you study how people who build serious wealth actually operate, not the mythology, not the motivational version, but the actual behavioral record, you find the same pattern again and again. Not relentless goal clarity, relentless presence inside the work. The goals existed, yes, loosely, directionally, but the attention was local. It was on what was true right now, in this conversation, this product, this customer complaint, this anomalous number in this week's report that did not match expectations. The present moment was not something to survive while waiting for the future. It was the primary information environment. It was where the edge lived. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about motivation that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it immediately changes how you choose to begin each day. But for now, stay here. There is a specific decision that presence enables and goal thinking disables. It is not a glamorous decision. It is the quiet pivot. The moment where you notice something is not quite right, or something is surprisingly right, and instead of filtering that signal through the question of whether it fits your plan, you simply respond to it. The market has moved. A client has said something unusual. A competitor has gone quiet in a way that does not make sense. An employee is performing better than expected in a function you undervalued. These signals arrive constantly. They are rich with usable information. And they are invisible to the person whose attention is aimed at a point in the future where the goal either will or will not be achieved. Marcus almost sold his best asset because he was watching it instead of being inside it. That word almost is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because he did not sell. He came back to the present for one evening with no agenda, and the present gave him 31%. What is your present holding for you right now that you have not been still enough to receive? That question is not rhetorical. Sit with it as though it has an answer, because it does. Your system, whatever form it takes, a business, a skill, a client relationship, a creative practice, a financial habit, is generating signal right now. It is showing you something. The question is whether your attention is local enough to see it. Presence is not the absence of ambition. It is ambition expressed through the only time that is real. Right now is not a waiting room for the future. It is where the compounding actually happens. The goal is a direction. The present is where you walk, and every step you take with full attention inside it is worth more than a dozen steps taken while watching the scoreboard. Chapter 11. The permission slip nobody gives you to stop planning. Letting go of your 5-year plan is one of the most financially intelligent decisions you can make. That sounds like an excuse to be lazy. It is not. It is an observation about what actually happens inside the mind of someone gripping a plan so tightly they cannot feel what their hands are supposed to be doing right now. The grip itself becomes the problem. Until you understand why, you will keep mistaking that grip for discipline. You will keep calling it ambition. You will keep wearing it like a badge while it quietly costs you the one thing no plan can manufacture, the full, present, compounding power of your attention. This chapter is about letting go, not giving up. Letting go. There is a difference so large you could build a life inside it. By the time you finish this chapter, You will not need someone else's permission to stop planning your future and start inhabiting it. That word, inhabiting, hold it for a moment, because it contains something most productivity culture never tells you. Every step taken with full attention is worth more than a dozen steps taken while watching the scoreboard. That line was already introduced in the last chapter's closing minutes. It probably landed somewhere real in you, the way a good sentence does when it is not just information but recognition. You already knew it. You had just not been given permission to act on it. That is what this chapter is for. Here is the open loop. There is a question underneath all of this that most people never ask directly. What if the discomfort you feel right now, the low hum of guilt when you do not check a goal box, the anxiety that arrives when you stop tracking progress, the sense that you are falling behind even on days when things are going well, what if that discomfort is not a warning signal? What if it is the last defensive move of an identity that is afraid to be replaced? Sit with that for a moment. Do not answer it yet. The answer is coming, but it needs the right foundation beneath it. First, a story. Marcus was 31 years old and owned a single-page document he called the plan. He had written it at 24 during a weekend personal development seminar in a hotel conference room with bad carpet and motivational posters that used words like soar. The plan had 5 columns for 5 years. Each column had income targets, savings milestones, a business metric, a lifestyle goal, and a sentence describing who he would be by the end of that year. He laminated it. He photographed it. He reviewed it every Sunday evening at the same kitchen table with the same cup of coffee. By 31, Marcus had hit some of the numbers and missed others. But that was not the problem. The problem was that the plan had become the relationship. Every major decision in his life went through a negotiation with that laminated page. A new opportunity would come, and instead of asking whether it was good, he would ask whether it fit the plan. A potential business partner appeared, and instead of asking whether she was sharp and trustworthy, he asked whether she was in the right column for year 4. The plan had stopped being a tool and become a judge. One Thursday in February, a real estate deal crossed his desk. It did not fit year 3. It was messy and faster and stranger than anything his laminated page had imagined. He passed on it. 8 months later, the 2 people who took that deal each cleared $42,000 in 11 weeks. He found out at a dinner party. He smiled, congratulated them, and drove home in silence. That night, Marcus did not update the plan. He sat at his kitchen table without the coffee, without the ritual, and looked at that laminated page for a long time. Then he folded it once and then again and put it in the drawer under the sink, where he kept things he was not ready to throw away but no longer wanted to see. He did not replace it with another plan. He replaced it with a question he asked every morning. What is the most valuable thing I can build right now? Not in year 4. Right now. Within 18 months, his income had grown more than it had in the previous 4 years combined. Let that sit without explanation for just a moment. The plan was not the villain in Marcus's story. The plan had real value in year 1, even year 2. The villain was what the plan had become, a filter that removed the future instead of opening it, a structure meant to create clarity that had calcified into a wall. And here is where this gets personal. Bring to mind the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not in the abstract. Specifically, what were you working on? What did you think your life was going to look like by now? How much of what actually happened was on any list you made back then? How many of the best things, the real openings, the actual leaps, were things you planned in column 3 on a laminated page? And how many arrived sideways and asked you to be present enough to see them? You do not have to answer out loud. But notice what comes up when you sit inside that question. The SMART Goal Industrial Complex, every seminar and planner and 90-day challenge and color-coded tracker has sold you a story about control. The story goes like this. If you name the goal specifically enough, attach a deadline firmly enough, and review your progress obsessively enough, the universe will comply. The story is appealing because it puts you in charge. Being in charge feels safe. It especially feels safe when the alternative, presence without a predetermined outcome, feels like walking into a room you cannot see. But here is what the seminar does not tell you. The room you cannot see is where every real opportunity actually lives. Planned success is real. It is also small. You can plan your way to a predictable outcome. You can execute a roadmap and arrive at the destination. And sometimes you should. There are moments where structure is exactly the right tool: a launch, a specific financial target, a concrete project with a deadline. But a 5-year plan is not a tool. It is a lens. And when a lens becomes your entire window, it does not just filter what you see. It filters what can reach you. Presence compounds. You have heard that phrase several times in this book. Each time, it has meant something slightly different. This time it means this. Every minute you spend managing the distance between where you are and where you plan to be is a minute you are not spending doing the thing that would actually close that distance. The math here is brutal. Anxiety about progress and progress do not run on the same fuel. They run on opposite fuels. One grows when you stop feeding the other. Which brings you back to the question left open a few minutes ago. What if the discomfort is not a warning? What if the guilt you feel on a Sunday evening, when you have not reviewed your goals, tracked your metrics, updated your spreadsheet, what if that guilt is not your conscience speaking? What if it is an identity speaking? An older version of you, one built inside a culture that taught you that self-worth and productivity are the same number. What if that discomfort is not evidence that you are falling behind? What if it is the last defense mechanism of a scarcity identity that knows it is being replaced? There it is. Scarcity identity does not announce itself. It does not walk in and say, "Hello, I am your poverty mindset, please pay attention to me." It dresses up as discipline. It wears the costume of ambition and calls itself drive. It hands you a planner and tells you that filling it out is the same as building your life. And for a long time you believe it, because the cultural scaffolding around you is made of the same material. Your colleagues have 5-year plans. Your feed is full of people announcing they hit their quarterly targets. The seminar hosts stand on stages and tell you that the ones without written goals are working for the ones who have them. The social pressure of goal culture is not accidental. It is the product. But notice something. Nobody who sold you the planner got rich by following a planner. They got rich by building a system that sells planners to people who believe the planner is the missing piece. That is the quiet irony sitting at the center of the self-help economy. You are not missing a better plan. You are missing permission. Permission to stop performing discipline and start practicing presence. Permission to evaluate an opportunity by what it is rather than where it falls in your 5-year column. Permission to let a great morning of focused, energized, genuinely valuable work be enough, without measuring it against a milestone that a 24-year-old version of you invented in a hotel conference room with bad carpet. Marcus folded his laminated page and put it in the drawer. He did not burn it. He did not write a new one. He got quiet. And in that quiet, he stopped managing the scoreboard and started playing the game. This is what identity replacement actually feels like on the inside. It does not feel like confidence. Not at first. It feels like uncertainty, the clean, open kind, not the panicked kind. It feels like a loosening of something in the chest, a tension you had been holding for so long you had stopped noticing it was there. It feels, if you are honest, a little like grief. Because you are not just letting go of a plan. You are letting go of the story that the plan was what made you serious, what made you worthy, what made you someone who was going to make it. You were always going to make it. The plan was never the reason. And the discomfort you feel right now, if you feel it, reading this, listening to this, that low resistance somewhere behind your sternum, that is not a sign you should put the planner back. That is the sound of a door opening. A little later, we turn toward an argument about identity and action that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it changes how you move through every single ordinary day. For now, here is what this chapter leaves you with. The plan was never the problem. The belief that you needed one to deserve your own progress, that was the problem. What could you build today if you stopped asking whether it fits the plan and started asking whether it is true? Chapter 12. The goal chaser was never who you really were. Every culture that has ever existed has told its young a story about what a good life looks like. The details change. The costumes change. The prizes on offer change. But the underlying structure stays the same across centuries and continents. Work hard. Aim high. Reach the target. Prove something about who you are. This story is not evil. It is not a conspiracy. It is simply the mechanism a society uses to produce effort from its people. And you inherited it the way you inherited a language, before you were old enough to evaluate whether you actually wanted it. Now here you are, carrying a framework handed to you by people who were also handed it by people before them. And somewhere inside you, a quiet question has been forming. Not whether you want success, but whether the version of you chasing it was ever really you. That question is what this chapter is built around. You just heard the last chapter close with this. What could you build today if you stopped asking whether it fits the plan and started asking whether it is true? Sit with what that question stirred. Something in you responded to it. Not your calendar, not your 5-year projection. Something older. Here is what no one told you when you wrote your first set of goals. The person doing the writing was already performing. Think about the first time you got praised for being ambitious. Maybe you were 9, maybe 14, maybe 22. Someone asked what you wanted to be and you said something big and the room warmed. Eyes lit up. You were called driven, mature, going places. And your nervous system logged that response. Ambition equals approval. Goal setting equals safety. The identity of the goal chaser was not born from your deepest nature. It was born from a single, repeated experience of being rewarded for wearing it. That is not weakness. That is how human beings work. But here is the cost. You have been maintaining a performance for so long that you may have stopped knowing the difference between what you actually want to build and what you want to be seen wanting to build. Go back to the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not geographically. Think about what you were chasing, the number you were trying to hit, the title you were trying to earn, the version of your life you had written down and reviewed every morning. How much of that came from a genuine, quiet knowing inside you? And how much came from a template someone handed you, a book, a course, a mentor, a culture, that told you these are the markers of a serious person? This is the mirror moment. Not to shame the chasing, but to finally see it clearly. There is a man named Daniel who ran a small procurement business in his late 20s. Not glamorous work. He moved inventory between manufacturers and retailers, took his margin, and kept things running smoothly. He had read the right books. He had the vision board, the yearly goals laminated above his desk, the quarterly reviews he did alone in a coffee shop with a fresh notebook. Every year he would set a revenue target. Every year he either hit it narrowly or missed it by enough to feel like he had failed. He was, by any outside measure, a man who had his act together, but Daniel could not shake a particular feeling, a dullness that sat in his chest on Sunday evenings. Not dread exactly, more like the feeling of wearing clothes that were almost his size. One winter he got sick with a fever that kept him in bed for 11 days. He could not work the goals, could not review the targets. He just had to exist. And somewhere around day 7, with no notebook and no performance to maintain, he started thinking clearly for the first time in years. He realized he had not made a single significant business decision because it felt right. Every decision had been made because it fit the plan. The plan had become the point. The plan had eaten the person who made it. When Daniel recovered, he did not abandon his business. He abandoned the performance of running it. He stopped measuring against the laminated number and started measuring against a different question. Is this work I would do even if no one gave me credit for doing it? Within 18 months his revenue had doubled, not because he tried harder, because he stopped spending energy on the theater of ambition and put it into the actual work. The scoreboard did not disappear, but he stopped standing with his face pressed against the glass. Here is the thing about a scoreboard. When you first see one, it fills your entire field of vision. It feels like the reason for the game. You organize your movements around it. You celebrate when the number rises and contract when it falls. But the scoreboard is not the game. The scoreboard is a reporting mechanism. And when you have been staring at it for years, when you have let your identity fuse with the number it displays, you lose access to the actual game being played on the floor beneath it. Distance changes everything. The goal chaser identity keeps you at the glass. Eyes on the number, body rigid, breath shallow, waiting for confirmation that you exist in the right way. And the cruel irony is this. The scoreboard was designed to motivate action. But at a certain point, your obsession with the score begins to degrade the quality of the actions that would actually move it. You adopted the goal chaser identity because the culture rewarded the appearance of ambition. Let that land, not your ambition itself, the appearance of it, the notebooks, the vision boards, the stated targets, the language of a serious person. None of that is wrong on its own, but it became something you wore rather than something you were. Now, 11 chapters into understanding that the systems underneath your behavior are what compound your results, you are ready to hear the harder thing. The framework you have been building across this entire book does not need a goal chaser to operate it. It needs a gardener. The gardener does not stand over the soil demanding that the seed grow faster. The gardener prepares the conditions, waters when water is needed, removes what crowds the roots. Trusts the process not because they are passive, but because they understand that their role is stewardship, not control. And the gardener shows up tomorrow, not because a goal demands it, but because that is simply what gardeners do. The architect designs the building and then anxiously monitors construction against the blueprint, correcting every deviation, measuring every corner. The gardener works in a living system that changes daily. The gardener knows that presence is the only real input that matters. You have been trained to be an architect. The architect is praised, cited, given awards. But wealth, the kind that compounds quietly over decades, is grown by gardeners. So here is the open loop you have been carrying since the early pages of this chapter. If the goal chaser identity was never really yours, if it was a costume you put on because the culture cheered when you wore it, then who are you without it? That question can feel terrifying. It can feel like loss. The goal chaser has been the protagonist of your story for a long time. Taking that costume off feels like standing in a room without furniture. But look again at that room. It is not empty. It is clear. And a clear room is the only place you can build something that actually fits. You are not the sum of your targets. You are not the gap between where you are and where the plan says you should be. You are the one who tends the conditions that make results inevitable. That is not a smaller identity. That is a larger one. The scoreboard is still there. You can see it from across the room. It is smaller than it ever seemed. And the game, the actual game, is finally visible. What kind of player do you become when you stop playing for the score? Chapter 13. The systems operator the billionaire became. You already know something has been changing in you, not because of one insight or one chapter. Something quieter and more durable has been settling in. And yet, right now, there is a voice in you asking the same question it has always asked. It sounds like ambition. It sounds like drive. But listen closely and you will hear what it is really saying. It is asking, but when do I get to see the number go up? That voice is not your enemy. It is the old operating system running one last check. The question is not whether you still hear it. The question is whether you still obey it. Because what you are building now is not another strategy layered on top of the old hunger. You are building something that replaces the hunger entirely. And that replacement is not emptiness. It is not passivity. It is a precise, practiced way of being in relationship with the work. There is a name for it. What kind of player do you become when you stop playing for the score? That question was not rhetorical. It is a practical question with a practical answer. You become a systems operator. Before you assign that phrase to a corporate org chart or a tech job description, stay with it for a moment. The meaning here is specific. It will matter to you personally. A systems operator does not invent. A systems operator does not command. A systems operator tends. They monitor conditions, adjust inputs, remove friction, and allow processes to run. They understand that output is downstream of conditions. And the fastest path to better output is rarely pushing harder on the output itself. It is improving the conditions that produce it. A farmer does not pull the corn up faster by wanting the harvest sooner. The farmer reads soil. The farmer adjusts water. The farmer removes what crowds the roots. Then the farmer waits. This is the identity that the billionaire in this story built his second act around. Not the brilliant founder, not the visionary, the operator. The one who shows up to tend the field. His name, for the purposes of this chapter, is Marcus. Not a famous name. Not a name you would find on a magazine cover. Marcus ran a distribution company that moved building materials across 3 states. By most external measures, he had succeeded. He had goals, he had achieved them, and he had achieved them again. But by the time he was 44, he told a close friend that he felt like a man who kept winning races on a track that led nowhere he actually wanted to go. He was exhausted by the scoreboard, not because the numbers were bad, because watching them had become the only thing he knew how to do. The shift happened when Marcus hired an operations consultant named Diane. She asked him one question in their first meeting. She asked, "What does this business do well when you are not in the room?" He did not have an answer, because the honest answer was very little. Everything ran through his attention, his decisions, his anxiety. He was not operating a system. He was being operated by one. Diane did not fix his goals. She helped him see that he had built a machine that required his fear to function. And fear, she told him, is a terrible long-term fuel. Over the next 18 months, Marcus stopped setting quarterly targets for himself. He started setting conditions instead. He asked, "What does a healthy version of this business do daily?" He built routines around those daily actions. He measured process metrics, not outcome metrics. He tracked whether his team had the clarity they needed. He tracked whether decisions were being made at the right level. He tracked response time, not revenue. Revenue, Diane told him, is what happens when everything else is working. Here is what Marcus told that same friend 2 years later. He said the number on the scoreboard had doubled. But more than that, he said he had stopped caring whether it did. That second sentence is the more important one. Remember the season you were in 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Think about how much energy you spent calculating whether you were on track. Think about the nights you refreshed a number, a bank balance, a follower count, a sales figure, as though looking at it harder would change it. Think about what that cost you in focus, in sleep, in the quality of the work you were actually doing. Now think about what that energy could have built if it had been pointed at the conditions instead of the outcome. That is the mirror moment, not to make you feel bad, to make you feel the distance between where you were and where you are standing right now. Now here is the open loop this chapter planted near its beginning, closing now. The question was not just what a systems operator does. The question underneath it was whether this identity is one you can actually inhabit, whether it feels real and available to you, or whether it sounds like the kind of thing that works for someone else, someone more patient, more disciplined, someone not carrying the specific weight you are carrying. Here is what makes it available to you. The identity does not require patience as a personality trait. It requires patience as a practice. It requires you to build one small systems habit today and then tend it the way Marcus tended his process metrics. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations, just with consistent daily attention to inputs rather than outcomes. James understood this. James, who appeared in the early chapters of this book chasing a number on a whiteboard, standing in front of a scoreboard he had hung on his office wall, circling an income target in red marker, has a different object on that wall now. Not a number, a list of 5 conditions. 5 daily inputs that his financial results are downstream of. He checks them every morning. Not to measure himself, to orient himself, to ask, "Am I tending the field today?" The scoreboard is still there in the corner of the room. He did not throw it away. He just stopped standing in front of it, because the scoreboard was never the game. It was always just the record of how the game had gone. And no one has ever improved their game by staring at the record. A systems operator is present, not present in the way that self-help language sometimes uses that word, floating and detached. Present in the precise, mechanical sense. Here, now, attending to this input in this moment, because this moment is where every compound result begins. The operator knows that the next quarter is not built in the next quarter. It is built in today's hour, and the hour after that, quietly, without ceremony, without checking whether the number has moved yet. This is the identity you are building toward, not a personality, not an attitude, an operating mode, a set of practiced responses to the daily question, what condition can I improve right now? The work does not require you to be different. It requires you to do different things repeatedly until the doing becomes the identity, until people who watch you work notice something steady and unhurried about the way you move through problems, until you notice it yourself. A systems operator does not chase results. They tend conditions and harvest what emerges. That is not a passive sentence. That is the most active sentence in this entire book. What does it mean to harvest? The chapter that follows this one will show you. Chapter 14. Put down the scoreboard and play the game. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same recurring story. A person stands at the edge of something large, something they cannot fully name, and they have to decide. Keep measuring the distance or step forward. In every culture, in every era, among every people who ever asked why some lives grow and others stay frozen, there has been a small group who made a particular discovery. Not a discovery of tactics or formulas, a discovery about what the game actually is. They found that the ones who kept looking up at the count were the ones who kept losing ground. The ones who bent toward the work, who stayed inside the motion of each day, those were the ones the world could not stop. You have been in this book long enough to feel something shifting. This chapter is where that shift becomes permanent, not because you will be given a new technique, because you are about to cross a line you cannot uncross. Harvest is not what most people think it is. Most people imagine harvest as a single dramatic morning when everything you planted finally arrives at once, when the numbers confirm what you hoped, when the scoreboard finally reads what you always believed it should. That picture is wrong. And more than wrong, it is costly. If you spend your days waiting for that one morning, you will miss the 10,000 smaller mornings that were doing the actual work. Harvest is not an event. It is a posture. It is the practice of collecting what each day actually grew, not demanding it grow faster, not checking the same seed twice before noon to see if it has moved. Look back at your actual circumstances 3 years earlier without polishing the memory. Not the version of yourself you have built in memory, cleaned up and made to seem either worse or better than it was. The actual you, on an actual Tuesday, probably worried about something that no longer exists. Measuring yourself against a number, a person, or an idea of what you should have already become. Were you playing the game that day? Or were you watching the scoreboard and calling that the game? That question matters more than almost anything else in this book. Here is the thing about scoreboards. They were never designed to help you play better. They were designed to tell the crowd where things stand. They were built for observers, and somewhere along the way, you began observing your own life instead of living it. The SMART goal system, the quarterly reviews, the vision boards, the 5-year plans with laminated columns, all of it is scoreboard culture dressed up as strategy. It gives you the feeling of forward motion without requiring the actual practice of forward motion. The people who sell that system know exactly what they are selling. They are selling the relief of having a number, not the discipline of having a craft. Here is a question that has been waiting since the first chapter of this book. The scoreboard was introduced early as something that motivates, something that tells you whether you are winning. But what if motivation was never what you actually needed? That question has been sitting underneath everything you have read. The answer is this. You do not need to be motivated to do what you have become. A gardener does not motivate herself to water. She waters because that is what a gardener does on a Tuesday. The identity came first. The action follows without argument. Consider a man named Reuben. He ran a small wholesale business out of a warehouse on the edge of a mid-sized city, and for 11 years he tracked everything. Revenue by quarter, margin by product, growth percentage year over year. He had a whiteboard in his office with every number updated weekly. Every Monday morning he stood in front of it and felt either relief or dread, depending on what it said. When the numbers were good, he worked hard. When the numbers were soft, he worked harder but worse, frenetic and scattered, chasing a correction instead of building a system. His business grew slowly, not because he lacked intelligence or drive, because every decision he made was a response to the scoreboard instead of a commitment to the game. One year he got sick. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough that he could not stand in front of his whiteboard for 3 months. His operations manager ran the daily work. The systems Reuben had built over a decade kept moving. When he came back, he found something disorienting. The business had grown more in those 3 months than in any comparable period on record. He had been the problem, not through laziness, through watching. The moment he stopped managing the score, the game played better on its own. Reuben did not erase the whiteboard. He moved it out of his office and into a back room. He looked at it once a month, the way you check on a garden after a week of rain, not to command it, just to see. His daily first question changed. It stopped being "how are the numbers" and became "what is the best thing I can do inside this work today?" That question took 11 seconds to ask. It rebuilt 11 years of habit. The billionaire who quit goals did not become richer by ignoring results. He became richer by refusing to let results run the meeting. Every morning before he opened a report or checked a figure or read a message, he asked himself one question. Not what do I need to achieve today? Not where am I relative to where I should be? He asked, what does the best version of this work look like right now in front of me with what I actually have? That question kept him inside the game. It kept him from climbing into the stands and commentating on his own life from a distance. You can borrow that question. You can make it yours starting tomorrow morning. Not because it is magic and not because a wealthy man used it, because it is structurally correct. It orients you toward craft, toward process, toward the thing that is actually in your hands. The scoreboard will update whether you watch it or not. The game only happens if you play it. Here is the crystallization this entire book has been building toward. The scoreboard was never your enemy. It was your distraction. It promised to tell you whether you were enough, and you kept looking up because you needed that answer. And every time you looked up, you lost a step. The gardener does not need the harvest to confirm she is a gardener. She already knows what she is. She works in the morning because the soil is ready, and so is she. Presence compounds. Not ambition, not surveillance, not the quarterly review. Presence. The daily decision to be here in this work, doing this next thing as well as it can be done. Put down the scoreboard, not forever, not in a dramatic gesture of renunciation, just this morning, just for the first hour. Ask the question, do the work in front of you, then do it again tomorrow. The score will come. It always comes for the ones who play. Now you know what harvest is.